You ever casually open a housing app? Not even because you're ready to buy, but just to see what's out there. And then 5 minutes later, you're staring at a two-bedroom house from 1987 listed for $500,000, and somehow the kitchen still looks original. That's kind of where the housing market is right now. A lot of millennials grew up believing homeownership was supposed to be one of the major life milestones. You work, you save, you eventually buy a home. That was the idea. But now, for a lot of people, especially millennials, buying a house doesn't feel difficult. It feels almost disconnected from reality. And for many millennial women in particular, the situation gets even more complicated because now you're balancing career pressure, higher living costs, student loans, rising rent, and an economy where even doing everything correctly still doesn't guarantee stability. So what actually happened? Why does homeownership feel so out of reach right now? And why does it feel like this generation keeps getting delayed financially? One of the biggest reasons this feels so frustrating is because millennials were raised with a very specific expectation of adulthood. Go to school, get a stable job, work hard, eventually buy a home. That was the formula. And for older generations, that formula generally worked better. Not perfectly, but better. Today, a lot of millennials are in their late 20s, 30s, even early 40s, and still feel financially unstable. Not necessarily because they're irresponsible, but because the cost structure of life changed dramatically, and housing became one of the biggest examples of that shift, especially in major cities. A normal middle-class income used to stretch farther. Now it often feels like it only covers survival. And once rent, groceries, insurance, transportation, and debt payments hit, saving for a down payment starts feeling almost impossible. Not impossible mathematically, but impossible emotionally, because progress feels slow, very slow. And this is where things get especially interesting, because millennial women are facing many of the same housing challenges, but often with additional pressure layered on top. A lot of women today are more financially independent than previous generations, more educated, more career-focused, more self-sufficient. But ironically, that hasn't necessarily made housing easier. In many cities, single-income home ownership is incredibly difficult, even with a solid career. And for women living alone, there's often a stronger focus on safety, location, commute, walkability, which usually means higher cost areas. So now the financial equation gets tighter. And then there's timing pressure. A lot of millennial women feel like they're trying to balance career growth, relationships, family planning, and financial stability all at the same time. And housing sits right in the middle of all of it, because buying property has traditionally represented security, stability, progress, independence. So when that milestone keeps moving farther away, it affects more than finances. It affects how people feel about adulthood itself. One thing people say a lot is, just wait for the market to cool down. But waiting has its own cost, because while people wait, rent continues, prices continue, life continues, and over time, that creates exhaustion, especially for millennials who already went through student debt pressure, recession-era job markets, inflation, and now high housing costs. At some point, people stop feeling like they're building and start feeling like they're constantly recovering. And psychologically, that changes how people approach the future. Some delay marriage, some delay children, some move back home, some leave expensive cities entirely, and others just emotionally disconnect from the idea of homeownership altogether. Not because they don't want it, but because constantly chasing something that keeps moving farther away gets tiring. And then there's the part most people feel directly: interest rates. The Federal Reserve raised rates aggressively to fight inflation, which affects mortgages heavily. And this is where housing became really brutal for first-time buyers, because even if home prices stopped rising, monthly payments still exploded. That's the part people underestimate. A house isn't just about the price tag, it's about the payment. A few years ago, a mortgage rate around 3% was common. Now rates are much higher, and that difference can add hundreds, sometimes over $1,000 to monthly payments. Same house, different economy. And suddenly homes that once looked possible no longer make financial sense. A lot of millennials now feel financially stuck in this weird middle zone. Too financially responsible to make reckless decisions, but not financially strong enough to comfortably buy property. And that creates this strange emotional loop. You work hard, you save, you try to improve. But every time you get closer, housing moves farther away again. Prices rise, rates rise, insurance rises, property taxes rise, maintenance costs rise, even furniture feels expensive now. And eventually people start asking, what exactly am I working toward? That question comes up more than people realize, especially online, especially among younger adults, and especially among people who feel like they followed the rules, but still can't reach the milestones previous generations reached earlier. Another thing making this feel worse? Social media. Because now people constantly see house tours, luxury apartments, perfect kitchens, people buying homes at 25, financial influencers talking about just investing smarter. And sometimes that creates unrealistic comparison, because what doesn't always get shown is family help, dual incomes, inheritance, timing, luck, lower mortgage eras, or simply buying before prices exploded. And that comparison culture creates extra pressure, especially for millennial women who are often balancing both financial goals and social expectations simultaneously. Career success, lifestyle success, relationship success, homeownership success, all at once. That's a heavy psychological load. So where does this go from here? Honestly, probably adjustment. Not instant recovery, not overnight affordability. Adjustment. Some people will move to lower-cost states. Some will rent longer. Some will buy smaller homes. Some may delay ownership entirely. And eventually, housing markets probably will stabilize more. But the deeper shift may already be happening. Millennials are redefining what success looks like. Because for many people, traditional timelines no longer match economic reality. And honestly, that may become more normal moving forward. And that's really why buying a house feels so impossible right now. It's not just expensive homes, it's the combination of higher rates, higher living costs, delayed financial progress, and a generation trying to build stability in a much more expensive world. Especially for millennials, and especially for many millennial women, housing has become more than a financial goal. It represents security, independence, progress. And when that feels delayed, people feel delayed too. Not because they failed, but because the economy changed faster than expectations did. And right now, a lot of people are trying to figure out what adulthood looks like in that new reality.